Pawn Star's guest walks away, rejecting Rick Harrison's offer minutes later. He returned to the store. The sun blazed over the Las Vegas skyline, casting long shadows across the bustling strip. Inside the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop on South Las Vegas Boulevard, business was steady as always. Rick Harrison, the seasoned pawnbroker with decades of experience and a sharp eye for value, stood behind the counter. His son, Corey Harrison, affectionately known as Big Hoss, leaned nearby, arms crossed, watching the action unfold. It was just another day and the shop cameras rolling, tourists peering through the glass windows, and a constant stream of people bringing in all sorts of items, hoping to strike a deal. Some brought in treasures, others brought junk, but every guest had a story. A man in his late 30s walked through the door, wearing faded jeans, a worn leather jacket, and a look of quiet determination. He carried a small velvet pouch that he clutched tightly in his hand. The cameras caught him hesitating for a moment before stepping up to the counter. Rick greeted him with his signature smile. "What do you got there?" The man unzipped the pouch carefully and pulled out a necklace, a silver chain with a pendant shaped like an eagle. It looked old, well-worn, and possibly handmade. Rick took it gently between his fingers, inspecting the craftsmanship and looking for any hallmarks or markings that might indicate its origin or purity. "This yours?" Rick asked, still examining the piece. "My grandfather's," the man replied. He served in Vietnam. Said this was made by one of his buddies while they were overseas. Rick nodded, impressed. Military memorabilia always had potential, especially when tied to personal stories. He turned the pendant over in his palm. "Looks like silver," Rick said, "but I'll have to test it." He moved to the back counter where Corey joined him, both men working quickly and efficiently. They used their tools to check the metal content and found it was indeed solid silver, though not marked with any standard purity stamp. Rick estimated the weight and calculated its melt value. "You know what you want for it?" Rick asked as he returned to the front counter. The man shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe $500. It's more sentimental than anything." Rick gave a knowing smile. "Yeah, I get that. But if I'm giving you cash, I've got to think about resale. That means I can offer you $250. The man's face dropped slightly. "$250? Rick nodded. "That's fair based on the silver content and condition. If it were pure gold or had some real historical value, we'd be talking different numbers." The guest hesitated, clearly conflicted. He looked down at the necklace resting on the counter, then back at Rick. "I guess I was hoping for more," he said finally. Rick spread his hands. "I understand, but I've got to make a living too. You walk away from this deal, you're welcome to come back anytime." The man sighed, then slowly pushed the necklace toward himself and slipped it back into the pouch. "I think I'll hold on to it," he said quietly. "Thanks anyway." Rick smiled politely. "No problem. Hope you find what you're looking for." With that, the guest turned and walked out of the shop, the door swinging shut behind him. Outside, the heat hit him like a wall. He paused on the sidewalk, blinking against the bright sunlight. The pouch felt heavier in his hand now, not because of the weight of the necklace, but because of the decision he'd just made. He glanced back at the store, then started walking down the sidewalk. He wasn't angry at Rick. In fact, he respected the way the pawnbroker had been honest about the valuation. Still, part of him wondered if he'd made the right choice. Maybe he should have taken the $250 and walked away. As he passed a street performer juggling flaming torches, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his sister. He stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. He stopped walking, turned around, and began heading back toward the pawn shop. Inside, the shop was buzzing again. Another customer had arrived with a rare coin collection, and Rick was already deep in negotiations. Big Hoss was laughing at something Chumley had said, while Austin, the youngest of the team, wandered the aisles keeping inventory. Just as the conversation reached a lull, the door opened once again. Rick looked up, and there stood the same man who had left minutes earlier. "You back?" Rick asked, raising an eyebrow. The man nodded. "Yeah, I thought about it, and maybe $250 is better than nothing." Rick smiled knowingly. "You sure?" The man stepped forward and placed the pouch on the counter. "Yeah, let's do it." Rick opened the pouch and pulled out the necklace again, setting it down gently. He picked up the calculator and punched in the numbers once more. "Still good for $250, he confirmed. "You ready to take it?" The man exhaled deeply, then nodded. "Yeah." Rick went to the safe and pulled out the cash, counting out 5 crisp $50 bills. He handed them across the counter. "Here you go." The man took the money and folded it into his wallet. He hesitated for a second, then looked at Rick. "Thanks, I appreciate your honesty." Rick nodded. "Anytime. That's what keeps us in business." As the man turned to leave, Rick added, "Hey, if you ever change your mind about that necklace, it'll still be here." The man chuckled. "Maybe I will." And with that, he walked out this time with a satisfied look on his face. Back inside, Rick watched him go. "Classic case of buyer's remorse," Big Hoss joked. Rick smirked. "Nah, more like seller's regret." Chumley, overhearing, chimed in. "Or just a guy who realized $250 is better than a what if." Rick shook his head. Or maybe he just needed a minute to process the reality of letting go of something important. There was a pause as the group reflected on the moment. Then Austin, flipping through a catalog, said, "You think he'll come back someday with something else?" Rick grinned. "Oh, he'll be back. Everyone comes back." He picked it up again, turning it over in his hand. "It's a shame," he muttered to himself. "Could have sold it for double what I paid." But he knew why the man had come back. Not because he suddenly loved the necklace more, but because he realized that sentiment doesn't pay the bills. And sometimes, even the most valuable things are only worth what someone is willing to give for them. Rick set the necklace down gently. Tomorrow would bring a new cast of characters, new deals, new stories. But today, he'd help someone make peace with a piece of history, and that, he thought, was